Hi, everybody. John Haldi here, and I'm with Steve Crawford. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here, John.
What Steve and I want to do, Steve has very graciously volunteered his time to teach us about IFTA and FedEx reporting of IFTA and how to protect yourself from boo-boos. Steve, I know that this is a topic that could put a lot of people to sleep. Um,
Absolutely.
but that said, it's a very important topic. But I think we agreed we're going to try to keep it moving because otherwise we might have folks falling off in droves. So I'm going to drive the slideshow if that's okay with you, and I'm going to pepper you with questions. Is that cool?
Sounds good. Let's go.
And by way of background, for folks who don't know Steve, he has been a trucker for all of his life. We did the math the other day. He was driving a truck before I was born, and I'm 54 years old. So that's a
Well,
long time, and you have seen the whole evolution, but we're going to stick to the here now today, not the whole back history.
that's
So
right.
let's do a quick primer on what is IFTA for no more than a couple minutes for folks who aren't familiar with it. Is that all right?
That's fine. And basically, the IFTA stands for the International Fuel Tax Agreement. Many years ago, you just did all your filings by each individual state. They put it together so that you only have to do one report. But very simply, the state wants their share of the fuel tax, road tax, whatever they want to call it, to maintain their highway. So, as an example, if you're getting 8 miles to the gallon, you go across Missouri. If it's 240 miles, you owe Missouri 30 gallons at their tax rate. And then you go across to Illinois, 160 miles, 8 miles a gallon is 20 gallons. They want 20 gallons at their rate. So you multiply that by a lot of miles and a lot of trucks in a lot of states, and it can be seemingly a headache. But if you keep your data the way that you should, and you've got your fuel purchases, you got your miles, then it's just a matter of understanding how the different taxes and credits are calculated in each jurisdiction. But basically, the state wants their share for you using their highway.
So if I could dumb that down for me to make sure I got it, if you happen to be driving in 3 states only with your entire fleet, and your fleet does 20% of its miles in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania wants tax on 20% of the gallons you bought to do that.
Correct.
Okay. Can we jump to the next section?
Sure.
So FedEx does the IFTA reporting for you unless you've opted out. We'll talk about that later. How do you go get the report to see what they calculated?
And that's right there on the MyGroundBiz MGBA account.
Oops, and I spelled it MGB, so apologies if it says MGB on there. So on the home dashboard, there is a box, depending on your screen size, it might be bottom left, it could be moved over, but you're looking for the one that says IC reports. Click on that, and you'll get to a screen that looks like the upper right. There's a drop down under report type for IC fuel tax reports, right? And once you pick that, fill in the rest of the boxes for the date range and view reports, and you'll end up with your most recent or historical fuel tax reports. It's a PDF file that comes down.
Right.
So the report itself, Steve, don't try to hurt your eyes here. We're going to zoom into this in a minute, but this is what a page from the fuel tax report looks like, okay? And from an organization structure, correct me if I get this wrong, each chunk going down is one truck. The truck is subtotaled at the bottom for what you owe for that truck. And at the very bottom, they have a grand total for all your trucks. And within each truck, they break it out by state for the states you either bought fuel in or drove miles in, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I've poured over this, and you taught me a bunch, so I'm going to share what I learned. There's 4 sections as you move from left to right looking at each truck. The green box summarizes your miles by state, okay?
Yes.
The orange box in the second section is their calculation of how many gallons you should have bought in theory in each state based on the proportion of miles you drove per state, right?
Correct.
The blue box is what you actually bought. So they're taking the gallons that they have in their database and saying you bought your gallons here. And then the yellow box, the furthest to the right, is Okay, what's the difference between what in theory each state should have gotten versus what the states actually got based on where you bought your fuel?
Correct.
Okay. We're going to dive into each of those four now. Miles. Help me understand this one, please, Steve.
Well, we have to fill out the form. It's called the vehicle mileage report. You have to turn them in weekly, monthly, whatever your hub or station is requiring. And this is how they're calculating that. You see, this particular tractor only drove 6 miles in Massachusetts. So they're going to owe, based on their miles per gallon, just a fraction of $1 of what they owe. But this here is your total miles. For a quarter, this truck ran 23,000 miles in the various jurisdictions that it's showing there. And then as you get one of the next slides, the net miles is going to result in how much tax is the state expecting to receive.
Okay, so let's jump to that. Here's the picture of the next set of columns for that one truck. And you can imagine that the state listing was on the left, just like it was in the previous slide.
Right.
So this truck, according to the number of gallons bought and the miles driven, got a very reasonable looking 6.67 miles per gallon during the quarter, right?
Right.
So they're saying net miles, 6.7 miles, 6.67 miles per gallon. This is the number of gallons that you should have bought in each state if you were doing it perfectly correct.
Right. Or you can just, that is the liability for each state.
Okay. Okay. So the top row was Massachusetts, 6 miles in Massachusetts, 6.67 miles per gallon. They think you should have bought 0.9 of a gallon in Massachusetts. The tax rate in Massachusetts is 24 cents a gallon. So they're saying you should have paid 21 cents in tax to Massachusetts for this quarter. And
That
so
is correct.
okay. I think I got it, but I want to point out something. That column heading threw me for a loop where it says tax paid. And then someone else explained to me, no, that's what FedEx is paying. That's what they're saying. They paid that tax to the states. They're reporting back to you what they did in the IFTA. So that's what you actually owed the states, and FedEx is paying on your behalf. That's why it says tax paid. It's not what you paid at the pump, right?
Correct. Yeah. And as you stated it, it's the tax that's owed, and FedEx is taking care of that for us and obviously charging us back for the expense.
Okay, so that tax paid is the key thing there. That's what you should have paid each state if you were doing it yourself. This is what you actually paid when you bought gas at the pump, right?
That's right.
So I can't remember which two states it was, but this truck only bought gas in 2 states.
Right.
And if you look at it, 1,091.4 gallons, and they paid 47 cents a gallon in that state. So the contractor's getting a credit for paying $512.96 in that state.
Right.
Same thing for the second state, they got 1,877, right?
Right.
Okay. So knowing what you should have paid and what you actually paid by state, here's that Massachusetts. You never paid them anything. You owe them 21 cents and so on. But those 2 states where you bought all the fuel, you actually overpaid them because you didn't drive all the miles in those 2 states.
Correct.
So amount due per state is there. Credit amount is what you overpaid. And then on the very bottom, it sums those 2 columns up. And in this case, they've got a credit of 138.59 for this truck. So this truck overpaid, probably because they bought their fuel in higher tax states. They should
Correct.
get money back for that truck.
Right.
If they'd underpaid, FedEx is going to put their hand out to say, hey, you got to true it up because we paid all the extra tax for you.
Right.
So now that we know how to read it, let's talk a little bit about where the boo-boos happen. And it has to do with the valid range, right?
Right.
I noticed at the bottom of every report, there's a thing that says valid range 0.01 to 9. So if you report gallons and miles between that range, it flows through hunky-dory.
Right.
the problems when it goes outside of that range, right? Just to articulate it, because you taught me this the other day prepping for this call, the big boo-boos are underreporting fuel purchase because you're using a non-T-check card, using a T-check card that's tied to a different truck, so a specific truck suddenly looks like it doesn't have enough fuel, right? And incorrect IVMR reporting. Maybe your ELD was down, maybe you screwed up paperwork, maybe the software didn't work, but you didn't give them the right number of miles.
Right.
Someone volunteered to share with me an example of a boo-boo, and this was probably the case of either massive underreporting of fuel or screwed up ELDs or something. But this is what it looks like, right, Steve?
Right. Right.
I noticed in looking at this that whenever they've adjusted your actual MPG, they put a note right below. They don't highlight it. You got to look for this, but we highlighted it for this screenshot in yellow. Note, for MPG used, calculated MPGs outside acceptable range, MPG for this unit is 15.49.
Right.
I think we can both reasonably say nobody's getting 15 miles to the gallon out there.
Pretty much. That's pretty high.
And so if you look at the other yellow thing, that MPG, they forced it to 4. And I'm sure there's legal or other reasons why FedEx does this, but they don't bring it to 9. They assume 4.
Right.
And that's where the pain starts.
Right.
If we look at the math on this example, can you walk us through how bad this is?
Well, it shows that a total gallons purchased was 1,404 gallons. And if you, and whatever the mileage might be, by downgrading it to 4.0 miles per gallon, even though you purchased 1,400 gallons, FedEx, by this calculation, is saying that you should have bought 5,439 some gallons. And so you're being assessed for gallons that you didn't burn, didn't use.
Now, in correcting the data, if you could show that it was actually 8 miles a gallon, they should redo the report, right, and calculate it correctly. And presumably you paid tax on those gallons if you show them where it's properly applied, right?
Correct.
But here, one truck, 1/4, $1,200, and we're just guessing 30 cents a gallon. It could have been in California, God help you, it would be $1 or something a gallon, and it would be like $4,000.
Right. It's definitely a hit financially.
And I don't think FedEx is being capricious, but they have to adjust it to something. They can't report to IFTA that you had 15 miles a gallon because IFTA is going to come back at them and call them out, right?
Right.
So here's another example, Steve. In this case, the truck got 9.56 miles per gallon, but they were downgraded to 4 because it's outside of the acceptable range.
Right.
Is it possible that this was legit?
It's very possible. The newer trucks are getting better mileages, and especially if you have good controls on your idling time, things like that. It's outside the FedEx world, but recently read a report where Walmart is getting over 11 miles per gallon on their trucks.
So it could be legit. But in this case, if we assume it's legit, the TSP owed $2,941. And if it's legit, it should have been $593. I did the math on it.
Right.
That's a big sharp stick in the eye for when you actually got great fuel efficiency to have to shell out another $2,400.
Yeah. It's a truck payment.
Yeah. So, Steve, teach us, what can you do to make sure you don't end up dealing with this kind of a boo-boo?
A mentor of mine many years ago said, trucking is a business of details. You got to be sure that you're accumulating all your data correctly. If you're using the IFTA through FedEx, be sure that your mileage reports are accurate, that they're turned in on time, that there's no missing miles or excess miles. as it says here, we don't get to see a draft of this report before it happens. So you're having accuracy of your data going in is very important. John had a slide earlier about your purchases. If you bought fuel using some type of a card other than the FedEx T-Check system, you've got to get those gallons entered into MGBA so that you get credit for them. And as it shows here, use the T-check card correctly. It can be really convenient. I've seen drivers make the mistake. Oh, I've got this card for this other truck and I'll go ahead and put fuel in. Well, now you just took miles away and you also increased the purchases for another truck. So maybe you just got done lowering a 7-mile truck to 6.5. You've actually penalized yourself twice. And so you've got to make sure that the card is used in the truck that it's assigned to. No exception.
And ELDs and IVMR, that's the other place it can go haywire, right?
Right. And that's easy enough to watch and correct, because even if they go haywire, and I only go by what my experience is, and we use Omnitrax, the data continues to be recorded, even if there's a bug in the system or something that it didn't report that particular month or that particular quarter accurately. But we have somebody, for example, we just have somebody look at odometer readings every month. On the first of the month, we always download the odometer readings just to see, are we getting good data? And tells us other factors too that we're not going to talk about here today. But make sure your equipment is operating properly, that your reports are being generated properly. There's vendors out here that are able to do those IVMR reports for you electronically. But the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, really applies here. You've got to have the right data.
And if you put garbage in, you may think it's going great, and then you get the IFTA report and you have a $15,000 bill, and you don't know it until that happens.
Well, and that's the worst part of it is that you're not even aware that bad data is going in. So you have to have some method that it's a self-check that you can be sure that you're doing it right.
And most folks talk to me and they say, well, I just got this huge bill I didn't expect. Well, don't just go by a huge bill, because if the bill looks like zero or near there, maybe you should have gotten 10,000 back. You should be reading this report every quarter to look for any errors that end up as that 4 mile per gallon boo-boo.
Right. That's true.
So make sure you look at the report every quarter. I'm not sure exactly how long it takes to come out at the end of the quarter. Do you know that, Steve?
If I remember correctly, because I've been doing my own IFTA for quite a while now, but if I remember correctly, it came out the third week of the first month. So like the first quarter ends March 31st. By like the third or fourth settlement into April, it's calculated. Unless they've got an internal problem that they weren't able to get it out on time.
And I don't know what the parameters are, but my guess is if there's a problem, you need to bring it to their attention sooner rather than later, because you might miss the window to fix it.
That is correct. Yeah.
And I know from hearing stories, you can't just call them and say this is too high and have them figure it out, because you're the source of the data. You got to bring in the correct data, correct?
Right.
What's the story with doing your own IFTA? Is that hard?
It's not. It's a little intimidating because it's new to some people, but you get registered with your base state, wherever that might be. In our case, it's Missouri, and we opted out of the fuel program then at FedEx. And all the data that we're talking about here, we're gathering on our own. So we download our mileage reports quarterly from ELD, which is, like I said, Omnitrax for us. We have all of our fuel purchases are going through the T-check card. So again, we can download that from the settlements. We're using Haldi software, and it provides that for us by state and by truck.
But other software does that. It's not just us.
Yeah, right. There's plenty of software out there. There's all kinds of places you can go. As long as you have the data, you can enter it into the different systems portals or whatever. Getting it set up takes a little bit of time on the front end. You're going to get your own license to go in your permit book. You're going to have your own IFTA decals that go on the truck. You got to upgrade those annually, just the same as you get them from FedEx. But once you start the process, the quarterly report for your home-based jurisdiction, as far as I know, most of the states, if not all the states, it's online. Running 37 trucks, it takes us between 30 minutes and 60 minutes per quarter to do IFTA. So it's not a big deal. Again, we're keeping records electronically weekly as the data comes in.
And if you do want to switch, there's actually a PDF document on MyGroundBiz that'll tell you how to do it properly.
Right. Yeah. And FedEx, if you do it wrong too many times, they will kick you out. So so then you're forced to go do this. So you want to be either be proactive or be prepared.
Steve, thank you a million times over for offering this education for everyone. You are always incredibly gracious with your knowledge and your experience. I can't thank you enough. And for anybody who happens to see this video, if you want a copy of this presentation to review on your own or have in your records, please just reach out to support@halditech.com. We'll be happy to send you a PDF of it. And last thank you to you, Steve. Thanks for taking a really dry topic and making it quick and easy to digest. You're a saint.
Well, thank you for having me. And my goal is to help others get to where they need to go.
Thanks all. And thank you again, Steve. Be well. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye.